I feel like on some issues, Joe Rogan can actually be quite reasonable with a little bit of extra discussion or persuasion or information. There are others where that's really not the case, and he can be quite opposite. And what I'm about to say is, I don't know which category this would fall into. I would hope it would fall into the one where, with more information and some conversation, he could be persuaded. We shall see over time. On his show, in talking about Mark Zuckerberg, the Meta CEO, doing jiu-jitsu, he made a claim about what kind of political orientation training in that sport ultimately leads you to because of the nature of the training itself. Well, have a listen.
By the way, I'll tell you for a fact, Mark Zuckerberg started doing jiu-jitsu, and nothing turns you into a libertarian like jiu-jitsu.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Nothing turns you into a person who, like, really values hard work and discipline and struggle like jiu-jitsu.
Huh.
Because of exposure of character on a level that, like, there's nothing else is like it.
Wow. I hadn't thought about that much.
Yeah, because you expose character in a way that it's almost impossible, even with other martial arts. Because with other martial arts, you can only spar so much, man. Believe me, because I spar too much. You spar a lot, you get hurt. And you get hurt, eventually you get dinged up to the point where your brain is just not firing so well anymore.
Mm-hmm. This is Joe taking what he would consider to be something approximating his own political values and laundering them through the glory and difficulty and sort of the character building process of training through jiu-jitsu. Now, let's be clear about something. There are many, many positives to training in jiu-jitsu, some of which he, in fact, identifies. It does require you to have some discipline if you want to get good at it. It does require, certainly, a pretty strong degree of self-reliance, although there's also really a team aspect involved that goes beyond that. But certainly, self-reliance is going to be a part of that. Hard work is going to be a part of that. All those things, these sort of more general values of struggle, but betterment through struggle, that are a little bit more universalist, that is actually really all there. There's really nothing wrong with that. The notion that training in jiu-jitsu makes you libertarian is patently absurd. You might get more libertarian training in jiu-jitsu, but it's only because you might have a team where people on it don't have a post-secondary education and get all of their news about the world from political memes. That's one way you could become libertarian. Another way you could become libertarian training jiu-jitsu might be that the sport or the school itself has attracted people who are very interested in learning how to gain physical dominion over other people, and that those people naturally self-select out from a kind of political influence to begin with, and so you might have that more manifest in the training room. That might make you more libertarian over time. Or it could be the case you might become more libertarian because, at least in the United States, when you train, this is a sport that is going to be not exclusively but largely walled off from more working class kinds of communities. It's going to have somebody that is typically more middle and upper middle class, and in fact much more upper middle class, certainly in denser urban environments. And that you're just going to get people who are more naturally politically inclined along that direction. Yeah, that could make you more libertarian. But training jiu-jitsu and then learning the character traits, or at least developing the character traits required for success, has absolutely nothing to do with libertarianism. Folks, understand this for what it is. As I mentioned before, it is just looking at the world through your own political lens, seeing something you like, and then imagining that that thing you like reflects back to you the values that are actually transcendent and good. Right? It happens to be that my political leanings, I can see them manifest in this sport, and therefore, I can see its value in what it provides. That makes this thing more dignified, and it actually shows that the political values that I hold, in this imaginary scenario, are actually the kind that really reveal strength, courage, determination. These are the ones that actually have more substantive value. I can prove that my political leanings, to a degree, are almost unassailably true because I can see them reflected in this activity that shows me the true value of aforementioned larger values. Folks, this is just obviously nonsensical. Again, there are core universalist values to most sports in particular, and then this one especially, some more so than others. Yes, all of that stuff is reflected back to you. But that it has a political valence is the trick of literally dictators of the 20th century. Fidel Castro liked baseball for any number of reasons. And he didn't just like baseball. Of course, the Cubans are famous for their athletic programs more generally, but part of the reason why they liked baseball and why he liked baseball was, one, he saw it as a national way to distance themselves from Spanish colonial rule, and more than that, Spanish colonial rule and the inheritance of the cultural practices that came with it. It was a way to reject it, but more than that, it was a way to show and demonstrate the value of Cuban values, the efficacy of Cuban values, the efficacy of the Cuban way of life, and in particular, his own version of the Cuban government. Does baseball actually do those things in real life? No, of course it doesn't do any of that nonsense, but if you want to hijack sports in that way and you wish to imagine that these sports are the true reflections and the representations of your own political ideology, you'll see it in just about anything, including, but not limited to, baseball. Boxing was used by the Nazis in a similar way, not merely taking big fights of big importance and putting them on the world stage, but putting them into youth programs to instill values of physical supremacy, racial superiority, militarism, you name it, all of those things. They were able to put it in there and make it used for that way. Does that mean that's the way that boxing inherently is, or that boxing inherently produces people like that? No, of course not. It was hijacked by them. But this is what I mean. Anybody of any political orientation with some differentiation, but basically anybody can read into what sport that they like or they're attracted to or they find useful. They can just see in that whatever they want to see, and they get something spit back at them, and then they think this closed loop is some kind of evidence of reality. No, you're just laundering your own views through sport. Here's a op-ed in 2019 in the Washington Post about MMA, and in it, the author writes the following, quote, "Of course, MMA is ugly, violent, and terrifying, but it's also proof of everything about America that drives Trump and his followers crazy, that cultures are best when they're blended together, that racial animosity and xenophobia, in addition to being morally indefensible and counterproductive, that diversity works. Trump's attacks on cultural pluralism are, by definition, attacks on MMA." And on some sense, there is a literal way in which the author is correct. Yes, there are multitudes of national identities, of different kinds of groups. They all come together. You get best practices, and in the end, you get something better as a result. That is technically true, but not in the way in which it's some sort of evidence of liberal ideals. There's nothing to that whatsoever. He is simply imagining that that is the case because he is pasting on top of MMA that which he already believes and therefore sees inside the sport itself. But it's not actually there. There's entire treatises around this. There's a book about this entire concept where somebody looked at the ways in which individual sports were treated as distinct expressions of political doctrine, both by governments on the left, governments on the right, ideologies on the left, ideologies on the right, and they found some differences in what kind of sports that they were attracted to and what kind of sports that mattered most to them for different political and ideological purposes. But at the core of it, there is nothing central to any of the sports that make it a distinct expression of one political ideology. There is not a shred of evidence anywhere based on either performance in the real world or psychological traits or any combination of the two or anything else that shows libertarians are especially hardworking. They might value self-reliance as a political ideal, but engaging and interfacing with a sport and learning some self-reliance in those individual exchanges and then turning that into some kind of mechanism for a political ideal to be achieved in broader society, this is the work of people who are intellectually the level of children. There's nothing to that. You cannot take something you do as sport and then imagine that the lessons taught in there have a direct political valence that is broadly applicable to the wider world. Aha, I achieved success in this particular way, in this very micronized activity of Jiu-Jitsu. I learned some lessons along the way about how I can use my own conduct for the betterment of my own situation. Surely this must have broader political implications for how a society should be run and governments organized. But of course, this is ridiculous. It is a much more difficult, complex task to get any of those second-order questions right versus more simple, although quite valuable lessons about how to conduct yourself and what lessons you have to learn to have success in an individual sport. And the reality is, if I wanted to, and I don't, but if I wanted to, I could make a series of other assertions about the value of jiu-jitsu. I could make the same mistake that Washington Post author made about MMA. I could say, yeah, you are going to learn individual reliance, right? That's true, but you're also going to get instructions from a teacher. You could learn sort of the value of social hierarchy. I'm going to have a training partner, and I'm going to have to train with different people. It's the value of teamwork, of community, of, in certain cases, I'm going to train with somebody not as good as myself, and I'm going to let them win a little bit. I'm going to work on small stuff, but I'm not going to really go too hard. It's the lesson in personal subjugation for the greater good. I could make up any number of different things that I want to if I want to see jiu-jitsu from whatever political lens that I or you or anyone else might have. Once again, that doesn't mean it is inherent to the activity. It is just a political valence that someone is imagining there because it makes them feel good to see their values, they think anyway, reflected back to them in something that they love. Listen, if you are libertarian and you do jiu-jitsu, that's your call. If you're not and you do jiu-jitsu, that's also your call. The notion that training it is going to make you that because of the way in which the training itself is conducted is complete nonsense. There is nothing to it. It is absolutely a fucking joke, if anything. Do not believe it. Do not accept it, because here's what you know. Anybody of any political persuasion might take this sport or another one and just imagine that it services not merely as a reflection of their own political ideology, but now we can take it and we can make it things for our own political ends that justify the whole thing. This is just a natural expression of things. This is just the natural way this is all going to go. Plenty of people train jiu-jitsu and have trained jiu-jitsu for a very long time who aren't libertarian. And by the way, for the record, thank God that they're not. But the point I'm trying to make is, if they aren't that way, it's not because they had some failure of jiu-jitsu to make them learn that lesson. It's that core universalist values of hard work, of self-determination, of being driven, of perseverance. These are all wonderful things. And when Joe says those things are taught in jiu-jitsu, he's right. None of that has anything to do with being libertarian. Mark Zuckerberg just doesn't want to go to jail. He doesn't want Meta broken up. He doesn't want Instagram or WhatsApp taken from him. So he's pretending, like he did the last time he pretended to have a certain set of political ideals, to just embrace these ones. And by the way, getting in good with MMA is the easiest thing anybody can do. Nobody cares what your reputation is. They'll just let you in. That's why he's here. That's why he has those, at least currently, political ideologies. That's why he has these otherwise political goals that he is trying to achieve. And this is the connection between them. Jiu-jitsu ain't going to make you a libertarian. It might make you super annoying, but it's not going to make you a libertarian unless you just already want to be.